Namaskar, I am Dr. Rama Paudel, Assistant Professor of Agronomy at Tribhuvan University. Welcome to third episode of SCIPOD, the conversation on science, policy, and development. In this episode, we will uncover the issue of diversity, inclusion, and academia in Nepal. Our guest for today is Dr. Neeti Aryal Khanal. Dr. Neeti Aryal Khanal is feminist researcher and assistant professor of sociology at Tribhuvan University. She has completed PhD in sociology from Monash University, Australia. She has been advocating for university as safe and dignified space for teaching and learning. Recently, she has received Fulbright Scholar for her postdoctoral studies. Welcome, Dr. Neeti.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rama.
How are you, ma'am?
I'm feeling good. I'm very excited about this conversation I'm having with you. So thank you for inviting me, and thanks to Barakari for hosting this talk.
So why are you interested in diversity and inclusion?
Thank you for asking this very important question. The interest in this issue was very gradual. It was not something that happened suddenly. Being a woman in Nepali society, I had always faced there's a sense of feeling of difference growing up as a woman in our society. And before I get into very deeper into the technical issues of diversity and inclusion, I would like to discuss the root issues that we need to understand before we uncover the issue-specific topics relating to diversity and inclusion. First of all, I think we really need to understand how knowledge is constructed in the society and how society understands who is a knower, who is a knowledge creator.
Yes.
So I am a feminist researcher, as you have already mentioned, and my lens and my viewpoint of looking at this issue is very much based on the feminist perspective. So I see that two major issues actually shape our construction of knowledge and also how we understand who the knower is. First is very much a androcentric bias. Second is colonialism. First, by androcentric bias, I mean that almost all discipline that we have and everything that we understand as knowledge has been predominantly created by men.
Yes.
And which is not necessarily a problem. The problem happens when the creation of knowledge by men from their standpoint of view and from their experience is claimed as a universal knowledge that applies to all of us. So that is called androcentric bias. So if you look at the history of majority of the science discipline, for instance, psychology actually has very interesting example how androcentric bias happens within the science as well. There was a significant history of research that looked into the size of the female brain, which claimed that female are intellectually inferior because they have a smaller brain. There is a long history of scientific research that was very much focused on proving intellectual inferiority of women. And with the question raised by the feminist researchers and feminist psychologists have actually debunked that as an androcentric bias. So such examples we can find in sociology and anthropology where feminist researchers have raised the biases within the discipline. So another thing, colonialism. If we look at the history of many of the discipline, the knowledge has been created to support the colonial regime. For instance, particularly discipline like sociology and anthropology in particular have actually founded because colonialism needed a certain kind of knowledge to sustain their regime. So because of that, even though now, we are living in a largely equal world where women are considered to be, as equal as men, and also there's no longer colonialism, but after effects of those historical constructions are very much there, which shapes our thinking about what knowledge is and who is considered a knower. So based on these perspectives, the way we understand knower is someone who is male, someone who is white, and someone in Nepali context, high caste, men are considered to be an ultimate knower. So these kind of image constructions have actually created an idea that women cannot enter into the academia, and even if they enter, they are not considered very seriously. Their contributions are not recognized. Their work is not considered seriously. So looking at my own experiences as a female academic teaching in Tribhuvan University, my very first struggle when I started teaching was to be considered serious enough as an educator, as someone who can teach.
But the situation is now getting better these days, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, with the discourse of equality, the discourse of women's right movements and range of different social movements that has happened in Nepal has definitely normalized women being in academia. But if you look at the leadership positions in all key universities in Nepal, we only had one female VC so far in agricultural university.
No, it's in Nepal Open University, Dr. Silu Mananda, I think.
So very few, but if we look at the key position, even if you look at the position of department heads, the position of campus chiefs, the deans, you see very, very few female, because again, if you look at the position of female academics, mostly it's in the level of part-time teachers, or even if they're tenured, you will see very few associate professors, you will see very few professors, because there are particular structural barriers that women academics and also indigenous scholars actually face in academia in Nepal. So that is why diversity and inclusion issue is very, very important, and I'm interested in it.
Yeah, that's interesting actually. Even if we look at the statistics, it's even harder for women to struggle in academia, which is the area of knowledge producer, than in other fields. By constitution, there are some reservation, and even in parliament, we have 33% reservation for women. And even in the bureaucratic system, the women's participation is getting more accepted. We recently have a chief secretary as a female, and that's a recent example, foreign secretary as a female. But why it's so hard in our universities to reach that position?
Well, I think there are very much a structural barrier, and also the very nature of academia as a profession is actually very challenging for women to, conquer in that field, because academia as a profession, if you see from outside, it looks to be one of the most lucrative and suitable for women with childcare responsibilities. It seems to be very flexible when you look from outside. I myself thought, wow, like academia is such a flexible job. I am actually thankful also that that flexibility, I could raise my two sons fairly easy. But if you are to rise higher in academia as a researcher, as an innovator, as a creator of knowledge, and especially if you want to build a career in academia that is very rich and competitive, if you want to go up in the international level, in a global competition, it is particularly harder for female, because the amount of energy, the amount of, the thinking time that you need to create knowledge, there's a structural barrier, especially for female academics to do that, because of the childcare responsibilities, home-related responsibilities.
Kind of biological barrier too. For example, like when female complete their graduate study, master or PhD, they reach on a reproductive stage. They need to get pregnant. They need to rear babies.
Exactly.
And then all comes with all child career responsibility on all this. So I think there are some biological barrier too. And then when they need to compete with the same another male counterpart at the peak stage of career, she lags behind due to her biological responsibility, right? Then the male counterpart go ahead, move ahead of female, and then they just feel that like women are inferior, like the paper publication, the research they are doing. I think that's I'm also feeling like that, when we have a small kids, like for example when kids are grown up, then female faculties are doing better. That's I think that's also happening. But how could we make improvement on it, on the participation of female faculties?
I want to draw attention to what you said. I'll come to improvement as well. So biological clock and career clock. are in conflict with one another. So at the same time, when we get settled down and we have babies, if we have babies, that comes into conflict within each other. So that is why also we need to consider issue of diversity and inclusion, because if academic institutions are not aware about these issues, they are likely to have very few female faculties in the leadership position. That is one issue that I wanted to highlight as well, drawing from your own observations that you just shared.
I was just thinking about the recent guideline that Tribhuvan University has came up with, the key major position, and then the numbers and all these grading systems. I was just thinking that even with that, they already have the scores for some few position, and that coincide with the biological clock of females. Absolutely. And then they already are behind with that. And I was just thinking, how could we consider that loss and reach to the leadership position in academia? What do you think about it?
Absolutely. I think that needs to be counted. Like I have seen certain examples, as you know, like we both have been also applying for international positions or international grant opportunities, and often in those grant applications, it makes me very happy to see that they have a clause like, if you have a career break because of the childcare responsibilities, how long was it? Then you just can mention it, because it creates a significant barrier for us, to be competitive. So I think the universities need to take into account of that as well, because women, when they have babies, they're not having babies just for themselves and their families. They are also creating
the future of the nation,
future generations. Yeah. And if a nation wants to excel, the contribution on having children also needs to be counted. We are raising the future generation, as mothers. Yeah. So if that creates a significant barrier for us in a career, that needs to be counted as well. So often I have seen good practice of applicants being able to declare where they had a gaps in a career, and then they explain it, and often it is considered as also a career time, because even for an academic, the life of academic is like, even when you are in leave, when you are not working, you are still working. You are either writing something, you are in the middle of your some kind of publication, you're in middle of some kind of research thing that you're doing. Academic is never on break, never on leave. That has been my experience. So even during the childcare, I'm pretty sure that women academics are doing something.
Yeah.
So considering the potential delay of the childcare responsibilities, especially childbirth and taking care of younger children, really needs to be counted. So that could be one good practice that Nepali academia could follow and acknowledge.
But how could we make understand to the academia, because it hasn't been considered, right? If we see the academia my counterpart just compete with me. For example, I have a small girl as my daughter, and then I need to take care of her every single stops. And then when she go to school, I prepare for my lectures, and then I do other academic things. So 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. is my time to self-care, to prepare for my some of the house, complete some of the household work and teaching and preparing.
Yeah.
But my male counterpart even have except the bedtime, he might have availability of most of the time, right? Not all the situation scenario. And how could I compete with and that's with him in that scenario? If we even count the timing, if we have male have for example 12 hours of work environment, and the female might have just 3-4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. So how could we take account and make create more competitive space for female faculties? I was just thinking about it, and I was just thinking how we can make the structure of academia just understand it.
I think when you think that it is us who we need to make the structure understand this issue. It is also considered a form of epistemic burden, putting the burden of making people in power aware about the issue that the marginalized people are facing. It is called of a form of an epistemic burden. But I know like we cannot get away from it. Being a women academic, especially, who are in a public sphere, who have access to media like what you have done. I think that's one of the beauty of the program that you're doing through this platform. So the burden is also upon us, but it should not be our burden alone. It should be the burden and actually a responsibility of a university. The powerful people in the university, the BC and the people who are in leadership position, to actually understand this issue, because
understand and act on it. For
exactly,
example,
exactly. It is the burden is upon them also, not just on us. So one way to go about doing it is starting having conversation about it, because conversations are the beginning of everything. And then crystallizing those conversations into the concrete policies, and also not having a policy that is going to be shelved in the corner, being dusted in the cupboard. That kind of policies doesn't work. The policy has to be something that is always a part of our everyday practice, organizational practice. So that is how we can go about doing it. And I think, the conversations like this can be the beginning of it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dr. Neeti. I really think that the universities in Nepal or higher education system in Nepal need to have a concrete diversity and inclusion policy that comes with participatory approach. Each individual have different section, right? So different identities. So we need to consider on those issues and then come up with a policy. Do you know, like, if our education system have such a diversity inclusion policy?
Not so far. Like when I studied in Monash University, there was a body that looked into diversity and inclusion. And if we look at the global practice within the universities, there is a authorized university body that looks into the all kinds of diversity and inclusion issues within the university. So in Nepal, it has not been a practice.
Yeah, I think in international universities, especially in the developed countries, it comes as a priority, a presidential priority. And I think that there is a space like dean or vital position that looks on diversity and inclusion, not only among the faculties, but also among the students too.
Absolutely.
So to address all these issues that needs to have body for that, we need to structure a umbrella policy for diversity and inclusion in Nepal, right? So what are the other challenges for diversity in spite of course it's a policy issues, but other challenges, the practical issues that we are facing in academia, the diversity and inclusion issues for marginalized communities, Dalit, Madhesis, women and others in Nepal.
So yesterday I had an opportunity to attend a talk program where we were discussing key issues faced by the higher education. So if we look at the overall education budget in Nepal, the higher education seems to be receiving very less budget. So first of all, if we do not have enough investment in higher education, we cannot work on these issues. So the first and foremost we need to do is increase the budget in the higher education, and then a certain section of that budget really needs to go for the diversity and inclusion issue. So one way of going about it is every university having a diversity and inclusion policy that can be informed by the broader umbrella diversity inclusion policy within education institution or higher education institution. There needs to be an umbrella understanding, and I think UGC has, I heard, started some work around it, but also, like, who is in the leadership very much matters. I mean, if we see at the UGC, if we see at the university, all positions are mostly held by men. And it is not, men seems to be very also, I would like to use this opportunity and platform to say that somehow in Nepal, diversity and inclusion issue seems to be men seems to be threatened by it. Men don't need to be threatened by diversity and inclusion issue. It is for benefit of everybody.
Everyone, yes.
Because diversity and inclusion issue is such an issue that I say it in a very layman point of view.
Mhm.
Okay, it is imagining a space where everybody is equally respected,
Mhm.
equally accepted.
Yes.
That includes men too,
Mhm.
because not all men are in privileged position. There are some marginalized men, there are some privileged women. So you talked about intersectionality, right? So we all have different intersectional identities.
Sure.
And sometimes we are vulnerable. Like I am a Brahmin woman, I have certain privileges, but
Yes.
when I go into certain spaces, I become vulnerable too. So
Mhm.
we all have different, positions within our society based on our identity. So diversity and inclusion issue is actually any organization which prioritizes
Mhm.
diversity and inclusion, which invests on diversity and inclusion. Research have shown that the people's motivation to
Yes.
work
Yes.
and learn is always higher because that place is inclusive. So if we look at the university in Nepal, everybody is crying about Nepali universities ranking on low. I would say it is one of the reasons why we are not turning our university into thriving space of learning, teaching, where people are, not passionate enough about these issues. It's because we are not inclusive.
Yeah, and
Inclusion
the
is at the root of that.
whatever, like either the man or woman holds the position, it's a responsibility for the leadership position to create enabling environment, to create sense of belongingness
Exactly.
for all, right? Either
Absolutely.
the faculties or the students or the staff,
Exactly.
everyone in the institution need to feel the sense of belongingness.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of lacking in Nepal. And
Absolutely.
I really think that the peoples who I don't think it's like it's okay to be man, but they need to think as a leadership position, not as a man, right? We do have men and marginalized communities. So for that, I really think that as in international practices, we need to have the policy and the structure together to address those issues. And Dr. Neeti, you are also working on gender-based discrimination for students, for faculties. What are these kind of discrimination in Nepal?
Well, I think within academia, like everywhere else in our workplace, there is a experience of harassment, various forms of harassment, including sexual in particular, has been happening in academia for a very long, long period of time. And it's just not the case of Nepal. Because gender-based violence or any kind of violence is connected to power. Okay, so people in position of power are usually take advantage of people who are not in power, those who are powerless. So usually in a relationship like student and a supervisor, so a lot of issues of sexual harassment and various kinds of harassments happen in these kind of relationships, and this has happened in a very leading universities like Harvard as well, and they have actually been complicit to the perpetrator because he is a very high profile professor. So when we talk about this issue, I also want to put it forward that it's not just like Nepal has a worst case. We have certain issues, but globally all universities are struggling against it because again it is very much to do with men's position as a knowledge creator. They hold a position of power, and often those power has been abused and harassment have happened. So in Nepal currently, universities don't have their own diversity and inclusion policy, which could include the issue of harassment as well. But in me being a staff of Tribhuvan University, because the very much of the case of the Tribhuvan University has also come into public, and I am together with my other colleagues and students, we have been advocating about it. So Tribhuvan University has actually formally acknowledged that anybody who experiences any form of harassment now can actually report it to their immediate superior. Like it could be the department head, or it could be the campus chief. And then if the issue is not resolved, then it goes to the higher authority in Tribhuvan University. And they have also formally recognized that university will abide by the Nepal's national policy in workplace harassment in 2015. So that is a progress, but university needs to have its own workplace safety policy, because the kind of harassment happens in academic institution is very different. The nature is very different from the harassment that happens in workplace, because the academia as a workplace in its nature is very, very different. So the nature of harassment is also very different. So we really need to do more research on what kind of harassments are happening. We need to clearly identify and define.
Actually, you were working in Kathmandu and in social science. You were aware about it. I'm also being a faculty of Tribhuvan University. I was not even aware about this progress. So while I was doing my master's and PhD in USA, we usually need to take the course before starting the semester, discrimination, sexual harassment, inclusion, and diversity. They have the representation and some certain level of online course, and we need to declare that we understand and we abide by it, So I think it's easy to create all those things and circulate to all the concerned faculties, staffs, or even students, that they are known that this is a progress. There is a unit that we are entitled to speak for our rights, right? If we feel harassed, then we can raise a voice, and there is a body that listen to it. I think it's not on that scale 8, because I work in Bhairava, but I was not even aware about that. Well, if something happens to me or my students, where could I go? I was not really aware about it. So that's really good, but I really think that universities need to go beyond that, keeping it in priority, because once people feel dignified, the productivity can be amplified, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So coming to that, we as a female faculty, we are discussing on this diversity and inclusion things, like how could we make our society or academia that everybody talks on these issues? How could that happen?
I think, I would want to ask you a little bit later why you're doing this show, but doing a program like this is a very good way about doing it, using our position as a knowledge creator by talking about it, writing about it. Especially for me as an educator, classroom is a space for my activism, So I talk about these issues with my students also. So we need to use our own classroom as a space for activism for these social issues. And another thing is, as academics, we can integrate issues of diversity inclusion within our own research. By saying that, some people would say like, oh, but diversity is not in my issue. But any research project that you're doing, what kind of methodology you're taking? Is your methodology gender sensitive? Is your methodology respectful to indigenous perspective? You could see from that angle.
Definitely, even if there is those guidelines in paper, just doing it to fulfill the criteria doesn't mean that they own it. Like we have to, for example, in many cases, like if there needs a female member in a committee, just one. Here is a female. Where is a female member? Like if there are 5 members, like who is capable, which female is competitive, they don't look at it and they're like, we need one female member. That comes in a mind of people to create that. So I really think that owning it, it's very important issues. To make them realize that it's very important issues to talk about, is I think it's important in higher education. So in diversity and inclusion issues, what are other issues that we really need to talk about in this program?
I think we women academics or academics from indigenous communities, we really need to start talking about our own experience. Like I am a feminist researcher. I always see value on telling our story. Stories have power of persuasion. Stories have power of, changing people's minds and hearts. So telling our stories is our our stories are not personal stories. Our stories are highly political stories because we are representative of the time that we are living. We are representative of the society we are living. So what we have experienced on a personal level can actually show where the structure is lacking, where the problems are.
But sometimes even telling stories can victimize a person, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very much true. So the society also, the listener of stories also needs to be ready to listen with an open heart and mind. Because if you listen to somebody's story with a bias, with your own preconceived opinions and a bias, you're likely to judge that story. So we should never judge anybody's stories because each person has a very unique, different experiences from where they come from, what their identities are. So we need to listen to all stories without preconceived notions and we need to listen with empathy. We need to listen without judgment, which our society, I think, is yet to develop that very well. I think it's happening. I see progress there, but it's still we need to listen to stories of different people from different walks of life. That gives us an insight where the problems are. And I think bringing stories of women academics and also through these kind of programs is one way
not
of
only
going
academics but there are lots of stories among students, like especially the female students. They might have get married early age, maybe they are pregnant while they are going in a graduate school or whatever. They are facing like different two families conflict or whatever, why they are not interested in the classroom or why they are not attending well. I think like listening and addressing the stories of students are also important, but I think it's very very much lacking, especially in biological science field. We just focus on like words on the syllabus and all these things. Maybe it's easy for you as a sociology faculty,
well, it's not easy, but I think even within the sociology, the focus is very quantitative, but because I am more interested in feminist research, I get to what interests me is listening to people's experiences, lived experience, embodied experience. So also, I think we're nearly maybe coming to the end or something like that. But I've, from the very beginning, since you gave me a call about having this conversation, I have been wondering like how assistant professor of agronomy, assistant professor of Tribhuvan University working on agronomy is running a, interview program in Barakhari media. How did this come about? I am actually very interested to hear your story of how you imagine doing this and why you're doing this. What is the motive for doing what is considered quite non-academic thing to do? For me, it's very academic what you're doing, but like I really want to hear your point of view.
Yes, actually, Dr. Neeti, like we all have stories, and we are here because we face lots of structure and barriers. We are just struggling, still struggling. Somehow we break the ceiling in some ways, coming from the rural Nepal and the government school, going abroad for higher education. We have different sphere of struggle, and then we come up with activism. You are activist in one way, you raise different issues, and I am activist in another way. And then like when I come up with some of my friends in politics or media, mostly like there was a very little space for scientists and academic people, and I was just thinking, like maybe we are more like politicized media and all this field. Why don't we make it more academic? So I propose the Barakari team. Why don't we create some space? And he was just like, he and the team was positive. Why don't you give a try? So I'm just trying it. It's my third episode, and I'm just doing it in different themes. In my first episode, I talk with a woman scientist, what are the barriers and her specific area, climate change, and all those. And we all talk about going abroad, like everywhere. Even I came in a microbus this morning, and people was talking about going abroad. And yes, some people are coming back after completing their education. In my second episode, I cover the story of a scientist, agricultural scientist, who came back after having a higher education in America, and he's doing really well. And then these diversity and inclusion issues, I am facing it every day, as an academia in Tribhuvan University. Getting such colleagues like you, it's kind of rare opportunity for me. So I was just thinking, why don't we advocate using those medias that we need to create inclusive space within our structure in Tribhuvan University. True. Even if I'm not being able to talk with vice chancellor or rector in office, but if they hear me through this, maybe it could be a means of advocacy, right? So I'm just doing it. I'm just giving a different taste, a trial. I'm not a journalist, but I think it's gonna. It's just a mean for advocacy for me.
Absolutely, and I totally agree. And we seem to have, like in Nepal, a very narrow structure or image about what academics do and academics look like. So having an academic who connects with the public about the public issue is very important.
Not only like the student in classroom, of course my student will be benefited from each of these episodes, but definitely the larger audience and communities, and even some of the policy barriers, we can come up with some ideas, either they listen or not. And at the same time, we also learn, right? I'm learning in all this. It's my third episode. I'm learning a lot from different perspectives in each episode. That's enriching my knowledge. So I really think that this is an opportunity for me to networking and knowledge creation, and I'm really enjoying it, actually. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for sharing your wonderful experience. And would you like to share something else?
Thank you very much, Ramaji. And I would like to request all the audience to share this video widely, so that leaders working in the university watch this conversation and start thinking about diversity and inclusion within their universities. And me and Dr. Rama, together with our other friends who are working in this issue, we are always happy to support if you are taking up any issue of diversity and inclusion within academia. And last but not the least, I would like to highlight that diversity and inclusion issue would benefit everyone, and it would ultimately enhance the experience of teaching and learning within the academia, and it would ultimately help academia to become a very thriving place of learning.
That's how we could just make the brain drain a kind of lace. Like lots of students are going abroad. If we want to stop it, many universities are struggling to get students. So if you focus on diversity and inclusion, maybe that could solve some part of the problem.
Absolutely,
right?
Very important point, because the issue of not having a diversity inclusion focus could be also one of the reasons why students are going abroad. We never know. We need to find out.
Many female students even say that why do you want to go abroad? They say that because we can get more freedom of expression, maybe, right?
Absolutely.
There might have some operation, like historical operation. So I really think that we really need to, even within our structure, we both belong to Tribhuvan University. I really think that we need to work together. And as a sociologist, I also have a minor in gender relation and international development in my PhD, just as a graduate minor. So I would be happy to collaborate with you if given opportunity, any ways, and we would be glad to have such a contribution wherever in Nepalese academia, if we can have, right? So Thank you so much, Dr. Neeti. It's always pleasure to meet with you and talk with you. And we are raising the issues not only for women. We last time when we talked about the menopause and menstruation. It was very enlightening, and today as well. And gender and inclusion and diversity and inclusion in higher education. It was so enlightening, a learning opportunity for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Norma, for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.